Thank you so much for coming out, and thank goodness India did not make it to the finals, otherwise we really wouldn't have had anyone here today. It's really wonderful to be back in person after, the pandemic. So again, thanks again. Of course, it would have been lovely if Shashi had been with us in person, but it's an honor to be here for the inaugural session in her name. I just want to begin by what struck me was the name of this the overarching name of this session is Celebrating Women. But what, in fact, are we celebrating? To say that Indian women are struggling is an understatement. Nilanjana writes of a gender emergency in the country, and she is not being dramatic. The World Economic Forum ranks India 140 out of 156 countries in the 2021 Global Gender Gap report. 21 women die every day here due to dowry harassment. Girl-child marriages account for 30% of married women in the country, which has only been exacerbated by the pandemic. Housewife suicides are on the rise. Heinous crimes against women are reported daily in the press. The egregious letting off of Bilkis Bano's rapists is a case in point in how demoralizing it is to be a woman in India today. All three of our panelists, through their books, have brought into sharp relief the enormous burden that Indian women carry to work and provide care within the home, as well as in the fields or in the workplace. Poor or affluent, we are all doing a double shift, all the while trying to remain safe. We're meant to be modern, educated, emancipated, but at the same time, the perfect housewife, mother, daughter, daughter-in-law. We're reeling under the dual force of tradition and modernity. It's no wonder that in the formal sector, we comprise only 19% of the workforce. Ironic considering as our economy is growing, our women are dropping out. No longer a leaking pipeline, but one that has burst. Our panelists today have written deeply moving personal books. Nilanjana, you've written about your maternal grandmother's suicide, your mother's suffering in her marriage, and your own journey. Arundhati, in your memoir, you've written so candidly about the difficulty of work-life balance and wanting to throw in the towel. Taran, you have woven in your grandfather's teaching as you unpeel Kabul. The title of your book, Nilanjana, I think sums it up so well. Lies her mother and that generation told us that we would be treated as equal decades after women first joined the workforce in India. In fact, that has not happened. We are unequal citizens in our country. In our conversations with you, all of you spoke about the need for women to speak up and share their experiences. What makes me sad is here we are in 2022 discussing issues that should have been put to bed long ago. So let me start by opening it up with the three of you. All three of you have written about the barriers that exist for women, both within and outside the home. What, in your minds, are the biggest challenges facing women today?
Want me to go first? First of all, thank you very much for having me for this session. It's such a pleasure seeing people again in person, coming in and doing a session here in an auditorium. It's a real thrill, actually, and that's very difficult to explain given the fact that we've been doing this all our lives, and then suddenly we were not doing it anymore. So thank you all for turning up today, and thanks Tata LitFest for having us here. So when you speak about the challenges, the biggest challenge that women have, I think I would say that it's not one challenge or the other. I think there are multiple challenges. But two or three things that I think, we can sort of look at ourselves. The number one thing I would say is that we have to be very clear about the fact that we ourselves must not, doubt ourselves. So, many a times I have found a lot of women holding themselves back because they feel that they are not doing justice either to their families or to their careers. So they take a call to choose one or the other, and my feeling is that, it's not necessary to do that, but that you can make compromises so that both get served, and you don't necessarily need to opt out of one or the other. The second thing that I think is very important for us to understand is that all of this can only happen with proper partnership, Many a times on the Women's Days when I go to address many sessions, there are only women in the hall. That doesn't really make the cut. And in fact, I remember telling one of the banks where I had gone, and this is one of the leading public sector ones, of course not the one that I was in, but another big one. And I was doing a virtual session and they were telling me, you must come in physically. And I said, I will on the day when half your auditorium is filled with the men, because they need to partner with us. It's something that has to be achieved in partnership. It's not possible for women alone to get to where they need to be. And the last but not least, I think, is the fact that you need to set the standards that you will live by. It is not important to go by standards that have already been laid down. For instance, if you look at it, the way our parents used to work, the mother was the last one to eat in the house. Everybody else had to be fed before she ate. In my case, many a times I eat before the rest of the household because I have a VC to attend, which is in late hours. So, these standards, if we try and follow every single norm that has been sort of laid out for us, well, then we are putting it's an impossible burden on ourselves. And that is, I think, something we do not need to do. And that is something we should be very clear about right from the beginning. That while, yes, we still believe that we are primary caregivers, we have not been able to give up that role, and we'll do it to the best of our ability. But you can set the standards as to how you will do it, and that is something that you need to very clearly set. So I think, these would be the top 3 that I would talk about, but I'm sure there are many more.
Thank you. I feel that for women, I think the biggest challenge in our country is that we haven't been able to shift the narrative from women being the primary caregivers. I mean, caregiving is not a rocket science. If I can look after a child, my husband can also look after the child. If I can cook, as someone had told me during the writing of this book, I don't cook with my vagina. So, if I can cook, then my husband can also cook. So I think, we have to shift the narrative that men and women are equal. These are life skills, looking after a kid, learning how to cook, looking after the house. Today, Indian women are, we have the highest percentage of women in higher education today. But then, when they, we are expecting them to step out, work, but then the narrative inside our homes are not changing, it has remained the same, down the years. And for women like us, like ma'am, like me, or, like her, we speak from a place of privilege. That is, we are 1% of this country's women. Women in this country do not have the agency to negotiate with their husbands. Right. Even if they're going out to work, they're going out to work with the understanding that they will come back home, look after the kid, do the cooking and everything. In many families, it's loud and clear. In other families, it's our guilt. We have so many guilts, mother's guilt, wife's guilt, daughter-in-law guilt, daughter guilt. And, we just try to do as much as we can without fixing our homes. And so, every time, someone asks me what's the solution, I say that, let's go back to our homes and fix our homes. If we fix our homes, everything will be fixed. And, during the writing of this book, a friend of mine had told me that, in Western countries, this burden of caregiving is a global burden on women. Sure. But, in Western countries, the role of a mother and a worker are not at odds with each other. But in our country, it is at odds with each other. Either you can be a good worker or you can be a good mother or wife or, like a housewife, whatever. So I think, that's what is the biggest challenge. We need to shift the narrative from who is the caregiver.
Right. Taran?
I think both of you have responded in a general way, so I'll take the opportunity to respond in a specific way, coming at the question as a writer working in a very ephemeral way. Oftentimes when I was working on my book, it was very invisible labor that I was putting in. Very often it would seem the day had passed and I had done nothing. And that really led me to question quite deeply the idea of productivity and that burden that comes with it, that you have to have something to show at the end of your working life or your working day that is concrete. And very often when you're working on something that is a book project or even a smaller creative project, the process is such that you end up with absolutely nothing for a very, very long time. And that's not okay. If you're a working woman, then you have to show the work and the invisibility of our labor. And this also, of course, applies to what I think it was Simone de Beauvoir who said, the Sisyphean labor of housework, because you do it and it just comes back, and you do it and it comes back. It's a never-ending process. You're rolling a stone uphill every day, and all of this work just vanishes, and you really have. And I think this is particularly my experience, that as someone working in a field where I'm not going to office. Say, for instance, I'm at home all day, and if, a male relative who works in a bank and he's a highly successful member of the global fraternity, making a lot of money and has all the accoutrements of success, he can very easily turn around and ask me, but tum karti kya ho din bhar? What is it that you do all day? So I think this is something that's quite specific to my experience, but I feel it speaks to a lot of the larger structural issues that both of you have signaled really well. And I think also the idea of if we're working, we have to be really good at working, but I think men are allowed to fail at work all the time. Right. And in the domestic front, they can just show up and get a medal, pretty much. So I think this is also something I find the need to push back upon. The fact that if you're a working woman, you have to be super good at it, and you have to be super good at everything you do at home. But so if you're okay with kind of phoning in the domestic chores, there's so much judgment that comes with that. If you're not an excellent, householder, I don't have children, so the whole burden of being an excellent mother doesn't come on me. But even then, I have to keep, a house that sort of represents my skills. And I think these are all things that, again, they're like larger structural issues that are creating these problems, but they are really how much they play out in our everyday lives.
Right. Nilanjana, I don't know why I should have been so surprised that your book made me so despondent, because in fact, everything that we are discussing is just sort of a kind of a very top level sort of situation. But if you think about what's really happening on the ground, things are so demoralizing. You write that we are in a state of gender emergency in the country, and in fact, every celebratory story of empowerment is an individual achievement, like, ma'am here, Arundhati. It's, how do you both, you are the living embodiment of a successful Indian woman, but I would like to, I know your views because the same, but I would love to hear from the two of you whether you think that people like Arundhati are really the exception. This is an individual achievement as opposed to anything, structural. Maybe you should start since we're talking about you.
When Taran was talking about, what do you really do? I was just thinking, when we were children, we used to watch P.C. Sarkar. He was a very famous magician, and he had one of his this thing was something called Water of India. So he'd pour out the water from a jug, and it would be empty, and then after each trick or whatever he was showing, he would go back and again pour out, and again the jug would, there would be a jug full of water coming out. So I look at the kitchen sink and it's like the Water of India. No matter how high it's piled, and you clean up every single thing, you leave the kitchen for 5 minutes, you come back and you'll find 3 other things again. I don't know how they appear there, but it's like something of that sort. So no matter what you do, how you do it, it just keeps piling on. Regarding my own story, I don't think it's one of a kind, because today I meet a lot of people who are, quite successful. If you ask me, the number of such people are increasing. Are they increasing by leaps and bounds? No. Are they increasing in some numbers? Yes. And what really enthuses me is that we are seeing Indians, especially women, in very many areas where I would never have thought that they would be there. So, even for instance, the other day I found a lady working the lift. Means you always thought of lift man. Have you thought of a lift person or a lift woman? You never have. So, similarly, people like in our bank, we used to have these liaison officers who used to sort of help senior management get to the airport and back again, and they would have duty at all hours of the day or night. And we never used to have a woman in such assignments. Recently, I found a lady in Indore who was doing an assignment of that sort. So stuff where you never really saw women coming in and doing things, you are getting more women. But as I said, they're not enough.
Yeah, may I
They're just
challenge
not
you on
enough.
that? Because the numbers don't support that, right?
I agree.
Our workforce participation rates are
going
plummeting.
down. It's going down. So that's what I'm saying. It's not that we are absolutely, unique. That's not so. Even amongst the entrepreneurs, if you see, you'll find more and more women coming up as entrepreneurs, which again was not the case even, say, 6-7 years earlier. But the fact of the matter is, there are still very few of them. And why are there very few of them? Again, as I said, I don't think we are set up in society to really and truly celebrate women and push them forward. They need a push. Why am I asking for partnership with the men? It's because they need a push. What Nilanjana was talking about, those are the standards society has put on us. That you are the primary caregiver, that you are the person who should feel guilty if your parents or parents-in-law fall sick, that you are the person, who needs to handhold a child as he goes about preparing for his JE or whatever it is. You are the person who has to give them the complan and wake them up in the middle of the night so that they study. So these are all stuff which society has of course put on us, but which we ourselves have nurtured also within. Maybe millennia has taught us to do it, and we have not been able to get out of that. We have not been able to sort of tell ourselves and people in general enough, this is not something that I do alone, it is everybody's responsibility. So yes, to some extent I would say that we are still not, we are not unique, but we are definitely nowhere near the numbers that we need to be.
I think stories of exceptional ability, exceptional achievement are something of a double-edged sword in something like this, because you see them and the idea is, of course, to feel inspired and to create this belief in maybe young women that this is possible, you can do this, here's someone who looks like you, who's achieved something that you are told you cannot. That is the value of this. At the same time, what we must critique as women, who are aware of how the workplace works, is that these should not be exceptions. These are ideas and these are facilities that should be available to everyone, irrespective of gender. And it seems like a naive and a utopian idea to have, but at the same time, it's important to continue saying this, I think. And in terms of, is it something that people achieve alone? I'm very strongly of the belief that women are really uplifted by community, and often that community is so invisible that even it seems like something that's quite natural or something you wouldn't even talk about. But if you sort of, turn a critical gaze towards the things we think are, well, of course, your mom's going to watch your kids when you go to office. And of course, your mother-in-law is going to help out if you're working late. There is a huge community. There is a lot of unpaid labor behind all of these stories. So, and I think it's, again, as journalists, as storytellers, and as women, we do have to recognize this and add this to the stories when we tell of exceptional women achieving things. Yes, but also, look at everything that's behind them. Very often my friends and I joke that, we all need a wife.
Yeah.
I think that really says it all.
All three of you have spoken about the change really beginning at home and these impossible standards that society has set. How do we begin to make these changes? Nilanjana?
We talk a lot about, not telling girls what not to do, rather, teaching our boys, what they should do. That is definitely, when we talk about the home, if you think about it, a child growing up in an Indian home sees the mother in the kitchen and the father, very, cliched image, is sitting in a chair and reading a newspaper. And even a few years back, textbooks had that sort of an image. Now, there's some change has come and, they're trying to, upgrade the textbooks. But I think, there is an entire at least 2 to 3, like generations, which have been fed this narrative that, men are macho and, they are breadwinners. And women, even if they, go out to work, still, I had this conversation with someone, online once, and she said that, but can you really deny that, we are better at it? And I said that, but we are not better at it, like my husband is a much more empathetic parent, than I am, he was the one, I couldn't even touch my son's diapers. I would be like running out of the room, every time there was a whiff of a smell, and he would, very, so, but these are, I agree with Taran, when we celebrate women, we don't tell the whole story. We need to tell the story of who's supporting us, because not everybody gets that support, or you get that support, a conditional support. That, yes, you can go out and work, you can have your economic empowerment, but, the family should not suffer.
It brings me back to Arundhati's own example, which you write about extensively in your memoir, about how your aunt came and lived with you to help you raise your daughter. And of course, the big, the famous story is of Michelle Obama's mother moving into the White House to help raise their daughters when he was president. And I think that that's right. I think that we never seem to speak about the fact that it really does take a village. Yeah. Your life story, in a way, is just, for a lot of people, it's inspirational, but it's also like, oh my God, I could never have done that. So, that's what that shift needs to come about. And the fact that, you did have, it was still extremely hard, but you still had the support. How do we, as writers, as journalists, how do we make those stories come out?
I think, honestly, I don't know. It's such a difficult, and it's so big, because patriarchy is so entrenched. It's in our language, it's in our, almost hardwired into even our responses. There's so many things that the last 10 years have taught us to have a language for. Just the fact that we went through certain things as young, for instance, I went through as a young woman, and I have recently found language to describe that experience of, the terms such as being gaslighted, or, just mansplaining is a term that immediately resonated with an entire generation of women, I think. And I think this is key, that we're finding a language to describe experiences that we've been through. And I think partly that's because we are learning to recognize what is happening to us. And once you do that, then you can address structures. And I think it's also really important to move, so much of conversation around this turns into anecdote, but it's important to recognize that what we're colliding against constantly is a structure. And it's a structure that believes that women's work is frivolous. It's necessarily unimportant. And if need be, will always be relegated to second place, and the first place will be their natural function of caregiving. And also, I think so, maybe for me it seems that this is a journey that starts individually and also collectively, just simply recognizing that this is what's happening. These are embedded ideas in our society, and being aware of them and talking about them and using language that describes them, I think, may be one way of doing this.
Right. Nilanjana, you wrote so movingly about your own personal story, your own family history. Could you share that with everyone? And just, the fact, it was very brave, because all of these things, we talk about them, but as you say, the change begins at home. And very often we are not honest about what's happening in our homes, and you were. So would you please share that?
Yes, I was just going to come to that. And you asked Taran a question, and I was going to say, we just have to stop lying. Because, when I was growing up, I had this image of my mother, as this super successful, professional. She was a detective cop, and she was the second batch of women cops in India. And, she was doing it all, and she did it. She struggled, the struggle I understood much later. But in the beginning, when I was younger, I saw her as I aspired to be like her, to do everything, and do everything very well. Because, that was the picture that she painted to me. But, when I grew older, I started having conversations. She had a very troubled marriage. My father is is a traditional man. He's like, in those days, women didn't go out to work, and she was a cop. She had like, various, shifts, and she used to be the the first ring of officers, around the Prime Minister. That point of time, it was Indira Gandhi. So, she had a first ring of women officers around her. So she had to, travel. But I have seen her struggle throughout her life. Like my father would just plain say to her that, I earn, absolutely fine. We don't, like he treated her job as a hobby. But, and I still remember that many years later, she was very sick and she was in the hospital, and I had gone to her office to, like intimate them or something. And when I went there, I saw her as the professional she was. And, she was respected, and she was like, she was, posted in a very important, position. But she never, let us see that. We knew that she had a job, but she never could dare to bring the pride of the job inside the house. It's like something like, I think it's a very well-known Indra Nui's, like leave your crown in the garage. And, like, I think, my mother's life was, like that. And I think I have often asked my mother that, why did you stay? And I was very vocal in my support for her. So I had a very
Stay in the marriage or stay in the what?
Stay in the marriage, and I had a very difficult relationship with my father because I always, like when I was like really young, like 8-9 years, even then I used to like just be very vocal in my support for her, although I was very close to my father also. And my father was a brilliant dad, he was jovial, he gave us everything, he supported us in everything we did. But, he let us fly, but, he kept his wife in a cage. Wife had to, sort of cater to, all that society had, and that I think is a kind of a puzzle, in the Indian, system that, today, what Arundhati was saying, that, you'll see a lot of fathers, encourage their daughters, to study, to, go out and have a job. But because, again, what Taran said, because, this is a structural problem, when they are married off, they face off against that same wall. It's like a vicious cycle. And, I think, it was difficult, to write my personal story. Obviously, there's always a point where you think how much to tell, how much not to tell. But I really felt very strongly that, if I write a very didactic book, saying, these are happening, how does it matter, there's no face to these problems, and I wanted to be very honest. I asked my mother that, are you comfortable if I write your story? And she started crying. She said, I can't believe that you think that my story is worth telling.
Right.
And so, and I really, like the one thing that I really wanted, while I was writing that book was that it inspires other women to come and tell their stories. Because, when we break this collective silence that we have all kind of agreed on, like what happens inside the home stays inside the home, when we break that silence, that's when change will happen.
Right. Arundhati, I read your book after I read Nilanjana's, and I can't help it, there was that one incident where your mother had to go away, and you were alone with your father, and you were so young, you didn't know how to use a chula. Yet you did it. And I was thinking to myself, but her father should have been doing that because that's the role of the parent, right? But you must have been 8 or 9 and you didn't know how to use a kerosene chula and you had to learn to cook. And then he came home and he said this, and it really struck me after everything you've said that obviously you didn't question it. That was your father, you were expected to do it. And in fact, throughout your book, you talk about like making dinner, coming home late, making the dinner, going to bed after midnight. And I'm like, why is she doing all of that? So please tell us.
So again, I think our generation didn't really think about breaking the entire mold. We did break it in some ways, but we didn't break it entirely. Okay? Nilanjana's generation may be more in a position to question why. We did a number of things, like I used to tell my husband immediately after my marriage, by the way, I learned to cook only after my marriage, really learned to cook. I mean. And I was, quite a good cook for that matter. But I used to tell him that after marriage, I used to feel as though I was in a Siberian labor camp. Because I was waking up at 4 in the morning and going to bed after 12 in the night. And in between, I had a horrendous work day where I couldn't even afford to sit down. It was that busy. And yet, I was doing it all. Till such time as I decided enough is enough, this is not going to work, and I'm going to teach the lady who's to do the rest of the work how to cook. By the way, I taught her quite well. She became the mohalla cook after that. So any sort of festivities in the mohalla, she used to be the general cook then. But the fact of the matter is, it is then that I discovered that you can do a lot of things even without having to break the mold. And that is when I discovered that, it's not a question of teamwork in office alone. There has to be teamwork in the house. And it is up to you to create that A-team both at home and at work. And for every single, colleague of mine who talks about it as to how you keep the work-life balance, I keep telling them that where's your team at work and where's your team at home? And the team at home can comprise of many, many people. It's true that the maximum numbers will be women even there. But even then, there would be men as well. So, for instance, I have my caretaker who does every single thing possible. She has the freedom and the delegation to do it her way, and I don't question it. There again, a lot of women will not give up control. I keep telling them that not sweating the small things is absolutely essential. It doesn't really matter what the menu is, as long as you give them a general idea of what you are wanting to, have in the form of nutrition. Let them do all of that stuff. So give up all of that. Similarly, I would have good relationships with my friends, with my neighbors, with the spouses of my colleagues, with even my colleagues themselves, because there were times when I was away and I didn't have the ability to take my daughter to the hospital or something or the other. It would be the spouses of my colleagues or my colleagues themselves who do the job. So the fact of the matter is, you need to create that teamwork at home. However, as I said, I still took on the responsibility. I still didn't break the mold. In the sense, I still took it on myself to be the person who ultimately primarily determines what gets done. And I wish maybe, that I was 20, 30 years younger, so that at that point of time, I would probably be able to say, to hell with it, it's your responsibility as well as mine, and let's share it, equally. Even today, believe me, it is not an equal sharing. Even today. And the sad part is that because I'm in the world of finance, normally, stuff that gets done by men in the house gets done by me only. Because my husband finds it so much easier to let me do the tax returns and let me do the investments. So that piece of it also comes into my domain, which it shouldn't. Now, I could have just as well again said that this is not my job, you do your own. But again, being what I am and coming from the generation I came in, I sort of took it on myself and did it. So I'm not saying that what I did was ideal, but I think, I did lighten my load a lot by ensuring that I have the right kind of people to sort of, to depend upon, so that many of these things got done by people around me who were willing to do it, and I didn't have to take on the entire responsibility. And that gave me the opportunity and the ability to go beyond, what I was being asked to do, and do equally well in the workspace.
Right. Do you have something to add?
I just wanted to add one thing. I think, the reason I have been able to manage my career as is because, I have had help, right? So I've had a housekeeper, I've had, people taking care of me. But that in itself is a privilege that is not available to a majority of women in this country.
Correct.
So then, it really, comes down to partnership. And I would also like to, address just one thing that Arundhati had mentioned earlier, that, yes, today, we see women in various kinds of profession, but, that is not a measure of progress. Why I say this is because, 80% of Indian women work in the informal sector. So you will see a lot of women coming in the informal sector as, like on lift duties or cab workers, but you see it's still informal work. They don't have benefits, and The worst thing is that because they are also clubbed as housewives, farmers, when you talk about housewife suicides, we are actually, talking about women who work in the unorganized sector and self-identify as housewives. We are talking about, women farmers who are not, called farmers. They are like the agricultural work that they do is considered to be part of their housework. So,
right.
So when we are talking about housewife suicides, there are these complications, these layers as well. So, it's such a complicated layered thing that, what we see as progress is actually probably not progress at all. It's probably just, and the one thing that I wanted to mention is that, the reason, so many women work in the unorganized sector is obviously because people need money, right? Double income, is, everyone wants to, educate their children. So, yes, women are going out to work, but, they are still not part of the formal labor force. They don't have the skills, Indian people have, I think, the level of skills among Indian men and women are the lowest in among all major economies. So, we are not approaching this, and this is my personal opinion, we are not approaching this in the correct manner, because, and it all goes down to the fact that, we don't consider women's rights as human rights.
True, absolutely.
So, but one thing I would like to say, while I gave some examples of women in the unorganized sector, even in the organized sector, there are definitely far more women than there were when I was starting out. When I was starting out, even the workplaces didn't have toilets for women. Okay, that's not the case anymore today. If you look at the time when I was chairman of SBI, 55% of India's banking assets were being headed by organizations that were headed by women. Today, if I'm in the IT sector and if you look around you, so many of the IT companies, whether it be Intel, whether it be, so many of the others, they're all headed by women. So, this is not something that was there even 10 years back.
Yeah, I think
I think we have made progress.
We have, but
not
the issue
to the extent where, you can really call it a success.
They are, but also the women that you're citing, there is a leaking pipeline. They are dropping out.
Huge. See, when you look at the entry level, whether it be in the IT sector or in the finance sector, both of which I have seen from very close distance, the intake is in the range of 33 to 37%. When you go into the higher management, there are only 4% women.
Right.
So from 37 to come down to 4, there's a huge leaky pipeline. Huge leaky pipeline. I'm not saying that's not the case. All that I'm saying is that yes, things are changing. The rate of change is not something I'm pleased with, or I think, we should be happy about. But the fact that there is change, I don't think we can say that that's not the case.
I want to bring you in, Taran, too. We've talked a lot about the home and changes in the home. You have written, again, I keep following all your books so personal, about, being a woman in Kabul, walking and discovering the city. And, the fact that now you live in Delhi, and we were talking about this earlier, that in a sense there is a little bit of parallel, right? Because being in a public space for a woman in our capital after a certain time period of the day is not considered safe, a real tragedy. And you wrote about just seeing Kabul on foot, probably may not be able to do that today. How do we reclaim these public spaces? What was your own experience?
Yeah, it's, I think my book starts with this fact that as soon as, almost the first thing I was told when I went to Kabul was that I should never walk anywhere. And this was 2006, so it was relatively peaceful. And I wasn't told this because I'm a woman. I was told this because I had come from abroad to work there. But it landed very differently for me because I had heard this in so many different contexts in my life, including in the city I grew up in Aligarh, which is about 3 hours north of Delhi. And the whole idea behind this being not to walk was that it meant you are not allowed to be in the streets without a reason. You have to have purpose to being outside, even if it's the streets of your own hometown, even if it's if to take a walk, unless you're linked, and now I think it's changed a little bit in the sense that it's sort of okay to go to a mall or somewhere to consume something, to spend money. But, the whole idea of loitering, which is the subject of a very interesting book called Why Loiter, is not that an option that's open to women by and large. And so for that reason, when I heard this sentence in Kabul, it felt like a city that I kind of already knew, because this is something I already knew about, that I'm not allowed to walk in many contexts. And that was a good place for me to begin exploring the city. And what I found was that, of course, there were places I could go if I pushed. And then if I couldn't go to certain places, there were alternate streets or avenues I could take. Very often, these were places that were not reported on or were not discussed when it came to a place like Kabul, because they were about women. It just wasn't interesting. It wasn't newsworthy. But I found them really interesting. I was fascinated by these stories. So when I was writing my book, this was a conversation I had to have internally. That, okay, so, for instance, I found the conversation between two young women about popular Hindi cinema that they had sat inside their rooms and watched through the first Taliban government. They just spent that whole time just watching Bollywood films, popular Bollywood films. And I was just like, why would you do that, And they said, well, it was just a way in which we could feel like ourselves again. And I found that so moving that, when it comes to a space like a war zone, you expect to only hear stories of noble suffering. You're not allowed to be frivolous. You're not allowed to have fun or even engage with leisure, which is the same dynamic that forces women to have a reason to go out onto the street. I think it's very much the same impulse to control our bodies, to control our minds. Having too much fun is not a good thing for women. This is what I also heard when I was growing up. Okay? You're not supposed to have fun every day. So I think all of this kind of fed into the idea that this is a city that I kind of know how to figure out. And, Delhi, again, is a city that is hard to navigate on foot, not for reasons of geography or, safety in the sense that of the same kind of risk that exists in Kabul. But I think, again, the idea of a woman being out on the streets on her own is such a charged notion in so many contexts that it just kind of tends to attract the most extreme positions, the most kind of extreme discourse that you can imagine. Whereas it's just, you wouldn't think twice about, a guy just loitering around. But for a woman to be seen in that way carries a whole story that's formed by society, that has nothing actually to do with her. So I think, a lot of my work is about this, the relationship between the body and the spaces it inhabits. And I think growing up in Aligarh, one thing which worked for me was that when I got to Kabul, and very often in the evenings, we couldn't go out. There was nowhere to sort of leave.
Loiter,
yeah. And I was fine with that, I was so used to it. I was very used to spending the evening at home, doing nothing, maybe. And other women, women who would come from maybe Europe or the States would say, oh, this is driving me crazy, how do you deal with it? And I said, but why would you go out anyway, every day? And I think what that did for me as a journalist, for me as a writer, was it revealed the potential of interior spaces. For instance, when there would be power cuts in Aligarh, all the women would come into the courtyard and we would tell stories. And these are stories that emerged only in the semi-darkness. They are not stories you would share in full, in the full gaze of light or in a mixed company. And I think that attuned me to realizing that spaces that we think are boring or oppressed or, unidimensional, where women are leading lives of humdrum, mundanity, if you scrape a little at that surface, actually there's a lot going on there. And I think, growing up in Aligarh kind of equipped me to do that in Kabul.
Yeah, there's a richness to that experience that doesn't get told. I'm cognizant of time, and I know that we probably have some audience Q&A. So, listen, we could have spent the whole LitFest talking about this issue and still not be done. But I would like to, open it up to anyone who would like to ask a question. Please introduce yourself and do ask a question. I think the mics are coming around.
Hi, my name is Nandita and I work in finance. So I listened to this topic being discussed on the forum, like by almost everyone. All of the panelists discussed it. that the labor force participation rate is actually going down. It has been the lowest that it has been since 1990s now. But anecdotal evidences point otherwise. So what Arundhati ma'am also said, that she's seeing more women in technology or in the software space more than what she did maybe 30 or even 10 years ago. Similarly, in the rural spaces also, I've been hearing all these things about women being more entrepreneurial because it's easier for them to handle their homes whilst doing something at their own pace, in their own time. So how do we reconcile the differences between what we see in the macroeconomic data and such anecdotal evidences, which point in completely two different directions?
Okay, Arundhati, would you like to take that?
I think Nilanjana answered it to some extent, saying that in the rural space at least, many of these women actually identify themselves as housewives. For them, the primary role that they have is being a housewife, not being one of the SHG workers. You have hugely successful SHGs nowadays in the rural sector, where the women are coming together and they are actually creating a separate source of income for the families. But for them, that's a activity which is more like a hobby, and it's not their primary activity, and which is why they don't identify themselves as such. In the urban area, I would say the leaky pipeline is a reality because we are actually able to track it. And there, the reason for the falling workforce again are many. One thing, of course, is that, in the corporate sector, the progression of people as they go, higher up, becomes more and more difficult. And one of the reasons why it becomes more difficult is because what we call unconscious bias in the workplace. Now, this is again not something that I was very aware of till about 2-3 years back when I got into our new company, that is the company that I'm in now. I went through this unconscious bias training, and you would be surprised to find that as many women have unconscious bias against women as men. Because, there is again this concept that women will always put their family first and their work after, because of which when it comes to a promotion, when it comes to getting a plum posting, they will think twice before putting a woman in over there, even though a man and a woman may be perfectly, at the same level. Okay, and as a result, what happens, women after a certain time, they just think, this isn't working out. What's the big point? I'm just as capable, and I'm still not being viewed as capable. And therefore, now we have made it mandatory for anybody doing an interview, whether for a promotion or for an entry, to go through the unconscious bias training. And I've seen so many women sort of just drop out of the workforce out of sheer frustration, because they deserve better, and they're not getting it. And therefore, it becomes mandatory for us who are at a higher level to try and create that atmosphere that actually nurtures women and pushes them forward. And I always say to the women, therefore, you must have not only a mentor, you must also have a sponsor. A mentor is somebody who's 3-4 steps above you, who will give you guidance when you are at, a fork in a road. But a sponsor is one who will push you into the right, positions so as to ensure that your career gets a boost. So a sponsor will normally be one step just ahead of you and will be networked enough to understand where are those opportunities coming up and pushing them into it. So I think there are reasons why this is happening, and the reasons are not as though they are not well known, but I do believe that very many positive actions need to be taken in order to prevent this.
Yeah, we had a question up here.
You spoke about the increasing crowd at the entry level, and yet the vacuum at the top, the 37 and the 4%. Now, do you think that is as much due to the fact that, we've always said that women are not being groomed for the top, but is it that women are not making these demands themselves? You spoke of unconscious bias just now. So is there unconscious bias also among the women who are trying for those positions? Or as you said, they're just giving up?
No, I think, women also refuse to take a leap in the darkness. okay? So I've often found that in a room, if you sort of declare that this position is coming up, and there are, 5 men and 5 women, and if you ask them how many of you are ready to step in, all 5 male hands will go up. Amongst the women, maybe 1 hand will go up. And they're all at the same level, mind you. And the reason for that is women have a nature of second guessing themselves. Even if the people are just about 30% ready all across, the men don't care. They just want to go ahead. For the woman, there are a lot of thought processes going on. If I take this position, will I get a transfer? Will I be able to manage to look after my family just as well? Will I do justice to the job? Maybe I need to prepare myself a little more. So I keep telling women, you've got to make that leap of faith. You've got to trust yourself that if all the men's hands shoot up and only a few of yours do, what is the comparison that I'm going to make? You have to trust yourself outside of your comfort zone and take on that challenge. So I think, it works both ways. It's not only the people who are interviewing them, but for the women also, whether they'll push ahead. There was a time, for instance, just the year before I retired as chairman, and there were all these foreign postings. And for our foreign postings, you have to apply for it and then get interviewed. That year, there was not a single woman on that list. And I was so upset with it, I called our in charge of international operations and I said, what is this that you have sent me? So he said, madam, nobody applied. What am I supposed to do? None of the women applied. And I told him then, I changed his KPAs to say, one of the things that you're going to do is mentor the women and tell them why they should apply, so that next time I want to see 1/3 of the list as women. Okay? And I knew that probably it wouldn't happen, but anyway, I retired after that. But subsequent to my retirement, after the next list came out, he sent me a message to say, madam, more than 1/3 of the women of the list are women. So he'd really taken trouble to mentor people, to tell them, to push them to apply. So, it works both ways. I'm not saying that it is a one-way street. It works both ways.
Okay, but I think there was someone waiting. So can we just...
Thank you very much for the talks coming out straight from your heart. The question coming to you is, first of all, the strata of the society where we live in, could it be India or could it be anywhere else? Whenever, the one thing coming to my mind is, whenever you're not ready for something, may it be career, a sponsor or a mentor who sponsors you also, puts you in the right shape, in the right position. Till you're not ready for anything, could it be celibacy, could it be maternal, could it be what is called maternal instincts or whatever, to raise your children or to put your family right. There's one saying is that if you put your house in order, other things get left.
Sorry, what is the question?
The question is, I'm delighted to listen, if you wouldn't have opened up so much, the people yet are living in a dream world of the last
Thank you.
50 years.
Thank you. Thank you. Can we get
a
it?
change in their needs at the world.
Thank you very much. Time is running short. This is Dr. Ranjit Tripathi, and the question is from all these distinguished panelists. My question goes to this particular topic, that the double shift, the price of being an Indian superwoman. So I got married in the year 2021 on 1st of December. So probably I would be completing first anniversary on 1st of December, right? So the thing is, charity begins at home, as the Nilanjana said. So I just want to know from the August gathering that, I believe, I'm not a feminist, and see, not...
Feminism is just equality.
Yeah.
Proud to be a feminist.
Actually, I am just coming on that particular topic. My wife used to tell me that I work for the government of India and my wife is working in the private sector, right? And she is the assistant vice president, some of financial aspects, and I work for the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. So the paradigm shift, which you have just discussed, that I adopted all these things just in my nature, and I practice it in pragmatic approach, not just in the book and all that, When I get up in the morning, my wife will not leave the bed until I'll make a tea her. She just say, you just make a tea, then I'll get up. So I'll make a tea, she will get up. She will go to the office, she will return late, I'll come early,
Sir,
I'll do everything.
What is the question, sir?
Yes, question is just coming. So the thing is, my question is, मैंने उनसे ये पूछा कि सारे सवालों के जो जवाब हैं वो एक ही चीज़ में है कि हमारी जिम्मेदारी when we come as a partner, the term which she used, I took 7 fears, when I was getting married. 8 fears was that we are not husband and wife, we are partner. So I think what is the threshold limit of the partner?
I think you need to ask your wife that. And on that note, I need to wrap up. Thank you so much. Thank you also to all the men who came. I think that was, I think they need the stage. So, okay, all right, we'll do one last question here.
Yeah, ma'am. So I wanted to know about mother's guilt on an everyday basis when you're fulfilling your dreams. You tend to face mother's guilt. How do you deal with that? That is something which I am facing since 10 years and not able to get over it. Like you want to be your best, but you want to be a best mom also.
I don't think you ever get over it, but let me give it to Nilanjana.
I mean, my son is 17. When he was 6 months old, I decided that I'll, work as an independent journalist, and I took him everywhere with me. So he has grown up to understand that I have a career, that I value that career. And just a small incident, once when he was around 5 years old, I got very angry with him because he was throwing a tantrum. I said, I'm going to just resign from my job right away. And he started howling. What will happen to your career? I didn't even know he knew the word career. So, mother's guilt is nothing. You just talk to your child. Your child is very proud of you, actually, So, whether you have a daughter or son, I don't know, but they are proud of you. And you need to believe that. You need to put that, understand, identify that pride and put aside your guilt.
Thank you. That's a nice note to end on. Thank you all so much for coming.